Is this thing even an Amiga anymore? All this and more on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Another new retro joystick?
Gotta catch 'em all, officer.
Why Wi-Fi your Game Boy?
Motorolla? He hardly knew her. The Duke comes to the Amiga.
All this and more coming up on today's show. Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. So Chris, before we get into this week's stories, have you noticed just the sheer number of magazines that cater to our retro hobby that have been on the market recently? Have you seen them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
have you subscribed to any of them, or do you collect any of them?
I have Amiga Addict, and I may have written something for one of the issues. And I occasionally pick up Retro Gamer. It's quite hard to get hold of over here in Australia, so I tend to just pick up a special. Special edition tends to be what we find in the shops. Other than that, no, not too many.
Just out of interest, how much does a copy of Retro Gamer cost you in the shop over there?
Do you know what? I can't even remember. It's that long since I picked one up. And in fact, the one that I've grabbed here, which is got a special on the Amiga 500, I bought off eBay. I find it quite funny that I'm already searching eBay for retro copies of a Retro Gamer magazine. But I think generally they're about $14, something like that. So, yeah, around just over twice what you'd pay for them in the UK.
Oh, double the price. Okay, so you do pay quite a hefty premium. Yeah, I'm going off on a wild tangent here, but did that follow through back in the day when you were buying like your Amiga games? Did you have to? Was there a premium on the cost of getting them over to Australia, or was it pretty fair over there for you?
Well, keeping in mind I grew up in the UK, Neil.
Yes, of course. I keep forgetting. But you talk to people
That's
over
all
there.
Good. I mean, looking at the prices, because often when you buy used games, the stickers are already on them, and it does look to be, again, about double what we would have paid for them back in the day in the UK. In terms of, when I say that, double the pounds to get the Australian dollar value. So that kind of makes them on par. So people would have been, shops would have been importing them in bulk. So I don't think they got hit too much with the cost, but buying them now is another story. And you just have to, unless you find the game you're after local, international postage is part of the price you pay.
Yeah, of course. Well, if there are any Aussie listeners out there who were buying games back in the day over there who want to elaborate on that answer, please do let us know, because I'd love to learn more. But just back on the subject of magazines, I've noticed loads. Retro Gamer came out 2005, so that's the granddaddy of the retro magazines, I guess, at the moment, and that's still going strong. But we've had others from Fusion Publishing. We had the likes of Crash and Zap. Those classic names now fall under Fusion Publishing. Amtix as well, they've been doing, and their own Fusion magazine. And you mentioned Amiga Addict, which you've written for. And from the same stable comes, I've got a copy here of Pixel Addict, which landed on my doormat. And this is an interesting one, because while it does have reviews, hardware and software reviews, it kind of styles itself as more of a lifestyle magazine. I think that's what they're going for. On the front, we've got the old Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, their history, rivalry, and battle to reign supreme. And there's some interesting... I should give full disclosure here, by the way. While I haven't written for it, I'm aware of it because producer Duncan has done some articles for it, including one on the cave. So thank you very much for that, Duncan. I wasn't expecting that. That's really, really good of you. But it's interesting the different approach that they've taken. They've got some nice interviews with, we've got Jason Fitzpatrick from the Centre for Computing History. You've got Zypho, who's a popular Amstrad streamer over on Twitch and YouTube. Really nice article on teletext. I'm starting to sound like an advert here, and I've got to say I'm absolutely not. I'm just interested in the different approach that this particular magazine has taken. And... it's worth a look. Pixel Addict, if only for the writing skills of producer Duncan.
So Duncan's written for a full-size magazine, Neil. I've written for Amiga Addict, only the once. That's full-size. Have you written for a full-size magazine, Neil?
I've written for Fusion, but format-wise, that's sort of like an A5 magazine. So I've written for a small mag. I haven't written for a full-size magazine.
Size matters, Neil. Size matters.
It does. Well, we could talk about magazines all day. Do you know what? Let's not move on. Let's talk about magazines all day. Mine back in the day was Amiga format. Amiga format all day. What was yours, Chris?
Yep. Yeah,
Same?
absolutely. Amiga format. Well, before that, Sinclair User or Your Sinclair. One of them had a bear as a mascot. I forget which one was which. But essentially, it was whichever one had the best cover tape stuck to the cover. But once I went over to the Amiga, I think I was fairly loyal to Amiga format. They seem to be fairly good if you're into games, and the cover discs were always good. But I do remember jumping occasionally, again, depending on what you got with the magazine. And there was a Zero magazine, came with an F-29 mission disc, which was worth having.
That was a multi-format magazine, wasn't it? Zero.
Yes, that's right.
That one.
And they had a special mission disc for F-29 Retaliator, which was good. And I do you know what? I can't remember the name of it, and I can't find anything about it online. And I don't think it did very well. But towards the end of my Amiga ownership, there was a magazine that was touted as a magazine on a disc. So essentially, you had 2 discs. You had a couple of printed pages, which were literally just a handful of adverts to help, subsidize the magazine. And both the free programs, so what you would have got on a cover disc, and the articles and reviews of games were both on disc. So to read the magazine, you had to put it into your Amiga to read it. I really wish I could remember what it was called. But yeah, that was
now
that was
you
one
mention
I
it
to as well.
I absolutely remember that. Now you mention it, I can't remember for the life of me what the name of it was. I think
Nobody
I only ever saw it like twice in W.H. Smith's, and then it vanished. But it was an interesting thing. And if it had been successful, it would have probably quite naturally moved into the CD-ROM format, and they could have got a huge amount of content on the CD for people to enjoy. But, we weren't at the point of e-ink and high-resolution displays that we could enjoy staring at for text for long periods of time, really, were we?
I was reading this thing on my TV, Neil.
Yeah, TV, or sometimes these things would put ham mode on the Amiga, which was just like a flickery nightmare. But they tried. Yeah, if anyone can remember the name of that magazine, please do let us know. Maybe we can trawl archive.org to download some copies and have a read. And might be something worth covering in a future show. Anyway, Pixel Addict. Check it out. On with the show, Chris.
Well, we haven't chatted about retro joysticks for a while, have we, Neil?
Oh, at least a week, Chris.
Oh, yeah, you might be right there, actually. But anyway, look, it links in nicely with the community question of the week, so I'm going to run with it, all right? Reddit user Protech438 posted a link to the Unithor, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is a retro-styled, let's call it a grip-style joystick, or like a flight stick, rather than the sort of arcade ball style. So it's a retro-style joystick, which is apparently in the works. And he comments it's definitely a nice change to the ball-type arcade joysticks. And I have to agree, Neil, after clicking on the link, this thing to me looks nice. It's more a retro style than a recreation. But it still reminds me of some of the nicer QuickJoy offerings, but with a bit of a modern twist. Think about things like the QuickJoy Jet Fighter definitely springs to mind, as does the Superboard. But reading the web page, it's opening to Kickstarter soon. So I assume the images I'm seeing are maybe concept renders. I'm not sure if there's a photo. There might be. It looks like it comes in either DB9, so you can plug it into your retro computers. So DB9 connector, including, wait for it, Neil, support for up to 2 fire buttons.
Whoa,
that's 2 fire buttons, Neil. Okay, but it also says that it will come in a USB variant. Bit of a shame that maybe they haven't shoehorned those both into the same one, so that you don't have to buy 2. But anyway, that's the way I read the web page. They're 2 separate joysticks. And they're promising a variety of customization options, including glowing lights and changing of colors and that kind of thing. It kind of looks like something out of Tron, but with more taste, if I can put it that way. This thing looks like my bag, Neil, if I can put it that way. Have you taken a look? What do you think?
I've had a look. Reminds me, I've got a few joysticks on the table in front of me here. And at first sight, it reminds me of, I've got here the QuickShot 2, which is kind of that flight stick grippy style look. A lot of people will be. Oh, you've got one. Chris is holding one up too.
It's as if we both.
So Quick Shot 2, and it also says Spectra Video. Some people may know it as the Spectra Video with auto fire option. It reminds me of that, like you say, in a Tron style with these LEDs added. It's got LEDs in the buttons and underneath, so it kind of makes it look like it's hovering on the desk. It's clicky. It's got a wide base. It makes no disguise on the website that it's a prototype. You know, it feels like to date it's just something these guys have been having fun with to come up with a stick. And now they've got to the point where they've said, if other people are interested, then we'll kickstart it. We'll make that happen, which is nice. I'll just read a quote from the website, which helps to put it into some context better. So they say, we're retro computing enthusiasts who simply ran out of joysticks. And so we've decided to develop a modern controller for computers and consoles from the era. The idea was that it wouldn't just fit retro machines design-wise, it was equally important that it was better and more wear-resistant than its long-gone or ailing predecessors. At first, we meant to build it just for ourselves, but with the encouraging feedback we got, we thought, hey, why not share it with other gamers? So that's their side of the story. Seems like their plan is to kickstart it at some point. This isn't a live Kickstarter yet. And, well, they're just feeling it out. Is that the impression you get, Chris?
Yeah, that's the impression I got, Neil. This style, though, definitely was my go-to for Amiga flight sims. I know that was something you were into. Until I just simply had to get an analog stick eventually, which, I mean, they were incredibly expensive for the Amiga. I don't know if you remember. And the only one I could afford was the Voltmace Delta, I'm pretty sure was the one I got. Think of trying to play a flight sim with a spoon in a yogurt tub, and that's essentially the kind of style joystick that was. But it was good enough for flying through turbulence in F-19, and that was all I was. That's the only thing I was after at that point in the game. But so yeah, I really did like back in the day for my Amiga. I favoured those, sort of flight stick like joysticks, even though they weren't great. But most of them, the fire buttons are only on the top of the stick, front and top. And so if you then want to swap to playing some shoot 'em ups like Swiv or Hybris or that kind of thing, that's actually quite awkward. I guess that's what auto fire is for. But if you're trying to play it legit, you got to have some buttons on the base to bash, in my view. And from memory, I mean, I'm sure there were more, but the ones that spring to mind are the Cheetah 125, not a great joystick, but it had 2 buttons on the base that you could bash. And also the QuickJoy Superboard was the same. It had actually 4 buttons on the base, even though they were both, again, flight style joysticks. So for me...
You've said some words. I'm just going to go and grab something. Carry on.
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah. Oh, what have you got there?
I'm back.
Another example.
You said QuickJoy Superboard. And this thing is
Neil.
a beast. Is that the one?
Neil, I'm going to, you know how you set up CCTV in the cave, in case when people visit, things go missing. You've got a boxed zip stick and you've got a boxed QuickJoy Superboard. If I ever visit England and those go missing at the same time, it's pure coincidence.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with the Superboard, or if you're just listening, it's like an oversized joystick with this ridiculous thing on the front, which is looks like a digital clock. And what that is a timer. So you can set the time and then you can press start and it will count down for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe you're sharing turns with your sibling and you're going to have 5 minutes each on the joystick. I don't know. But that's what the Superboard is all about. I never knew anyone who had that one back in the day.
Me, I had one.
You had one, so now I do.
I had one, and look, what I like about that, and for the viewers at home, other than the timer, which was completely useless, it had the traditional fire buttons on the front and top, but it also had 4 very bashable fire buttons on the base as well. So if you did feel like swapping to a fast-paced shoot 'em up, you could quite easily smack away, either for the left or right-handed. And it did both jobs well. And I think there were very few joysticks that did that back then. It was micro switch, wasn't it, Neil? And it did suffer those snapping springs that most of the QuickJoy micro switch joysticks
yes.
had.
So a problem of physics came into play when we used these old joysticks, because the longer the shaft, the more stress is going to be put on the bottom of the stick when you start playing your shoot 'em ups, your fast-paced shoot 'em ups, and
I'm
that's
keeping a straight face on.
I know it's difficult, but that's why I snapped so many joysticks back in the day. They just. The classic one everyone talks about is Daley Thompson's Decathlon and all of those joystick wagglers, but it could happen on any game if you were fast and furious in your gameplay, which is why I quickly transferred to such sticks as this. I've got here in front of me a Conix Speed King. I don't know if you ever had the Speed King.
I saw it, but I didn't have it.
I didn't have this. I had the Conix Navigator, which was a very similar handheld stick with a much shorter there's no other word for it, a much shorter shaft. And then the popular one, this is the one you were talking about earlier, was the Zip Stick.
Yes.
I think I talked about this last week, how I reached the point of obsession in my collecting where I spent, I think it was £7 or £8 on just the box for this on eBay last week. And I've reunited the joystick with the box. Well, there it is.
Yep.
But the thing about these flight style sticks that were digital was it was fine at the time. A lot of the Amiga games, they would just assume that you had a digital stick. Some of them didn't support analog whatsoever, and that's just the way it was. But then when people started throwing more money at their PCs and these more complex flight sims came out, what we all dreamed of was the likes of this absolute monster here. This is the Thrustmaster F22 Pro, and that's just half of the stick because you also had the hot ass throttle next to it, and if you went really overboard, you had the pedals as well, so you had the full setup. This thing weighs an absolute ton. I've actually converted it to USB, so it still works in the modern day.
Nice.
But you can still get sort of the equivalent of this by Thrustmaster. They're still making sticks like this. The A10 Warthog is an example. And you're looking at £400 or so plus for that kind of joystick. So joysticks got really serious, and they remain really serious. If you're into your flight sims, there's no way you're playing your flight sim with a Quick Shot 2 these days. The one that I like to use at home these days is called the CH Fighter Stick USB, and that will be instantly recognizable to anyone who looks at it and remembers the classic CH flight stick back in the 90s. It still looks exactly the same. And it's feather light. That's what I like about it. The Thrustmaster, you're really fighting with it. This one's great. And a game I've been playing recently is Comanche 4, which is the helicopter series. It came out in 2001, so it's a retro game, but it's on Steam, so I can play it easily on my modern computer. So that's what I've been playing lately with my my CH flight stick. And one I'm trying to track down boxed at the moment for the collection, because the reason I've got all these boxed ones is because I want to make a cabinet display of joysticks, because they evoke such emotions in people when they see these things, especially boxed, because that went straight in the bin normally. So I'm trying to get a hold of a nice example of a Microsoft Sidewinder. Do you remember when those first appeared?
Yeah, I do.
In the stores.
Yeah.
They had these kind of force feedback displays where you could press a button for to experience the different types of feedback that it could do. And you would sort of hold the joystick in the shop and press a button and it would rattle away in your hand. Even better. If I could get hold of one of those displays, that would be brilliant.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. So anyway, going back to this particular joystick, which was the, what was the name of it now? The something Thor, the Uni-Thor. Yeah, the Uni-Thor. I'm certainly watching it with interest. Do you think you'll back this one, Chris?
Well, I'm the same. I'm certainly watching it with interest. I'll be honest, unless it's a proven name selling something like a colouring book, I'm actually not one to jump on Kickstarter. No. And look, I do realise I'm starting to miss out on things, the Spectrum Next being one of them. So I may change my mind on that at some point. But I definitely think this is one that I will watch and see how it pans out, in the hope that there's a second chance to grab one via other means if it's a success. If it has fire buttons on the base, like I suggested, and if they can squeeze DB9 and USB support in a single joystick, then I'll definitely be interested. I don't ask for much, Neil.
Our next story this week is a story submitted by Starcade2084 over on the subreddit. Thank you for that. And it's a story of obsession. You'll remember the excitement that surrounded Pokemon Go. even if you didn't play it. You will certainly remember the buzz in the media and the excitement around it. It was an augmented reality mobile app that took the classic Pokemon collecting gameplay of old and layered it onto the real world. Well, it turns out in 2017, although this has just come out, in 2017, 2 police officers were big fans of the app. So much so that officers Lozano and Mitchell, who were patrolling LA, they sound like good partner names, Lozano and Mitchell on the streets of LA. They were patrolling LA.
Show, Neil.
And they failed to respond to a robbery in progress shout because they were busy trying to catch a Snorlax on 46th Street. Yeah. And embarrassingly, it was all captured on the patrol car's monitoring system. The hunt was concluded when Officer Mitchell exclaimed, "Holy crap, finally, the guys are going to be so jealous." They got their Snorlax.
Oh, no.
So they were eventually
For the listeners,
dismissed.
I just face-palmed.
They were eventually dismissed for gross negligence, cowardice, lack of thoughtfulness, and deceit by the LAPD Board of Rights. And, well, I'm going to say quite right too. I can't really argue with that.
No.
No. So I'm certainly not going to start making excuses for their behavior, but it reflects in the extreme, in this example, the collision of addictive gaming, which is nothing new, let's be honest, from the birth of video gaming. It's all about being addicted to the game and coming back for just another go. Combining that with portable platforms and platforms that you might never, ever truly switch off from. So let's talk about that, Chris. We're old school gamers. We've been addicted to many games, I'm sure, over the years. Did the transition, not to mobile phones with Snake on and all of that, but to the more recent generation, I guess, of mobile phones with 3 or 4G connectivity, did that result in addictive behavior, game or otherwise, for you of any kind?
Oh, absolutely, Neil. I mean, they're the obvious ones, like, you know, the Facebook scroll of doom. I've actually removed Facebook from my phone for that reason. But I find the compulsion is then just replaced with checking email or checking the news or whatever. It's a really hard habit to get hold of. That moment when you realize that your phone is once again in your hand and you can't even remember how or why it got there. But as far as mobile gaming goes, Neil, let me tell you about the game that Niantic created before they created Pokemon. Have you heard of Ingress, Neil?
I haven't. No, tell me about it.
Okay, so Ingress essentially was almost them doing the test run, if you like, for what became Pokemon Go. And in fact, in some ways, the players of Ingress were helping to develop Pokemon Go, because all those things that you will know as Pokestops or gyms or whatever they're called in that flipping game, they were portals in the game Ingress, and they were submitted by the players. So if you found a point of interest out in your local area or whatever, you took a photo of it, you wrote a description, you submitted it via the game as a portal. And lots of people were into submitting portals, especially if they were in a hard-to-reach place, because that was to your advantage as a player of the game, or especially if it was within GPS reach of, let's say, your desk on a 4th floor office. Not that I ever did that, because it was again really to your advantage to have a portal close to your to wherever you were going to spend a lot of time. Ingress, how do I describe Ingress? Essentially, you're basically playing against other people in your area. There are 2 teams, a green one called the Enlightened and a blue one called the Resistance, and you fought for territory in your area. That was essentially the main premise of the game, and you gained territory by joining portals together in a triangle. That became a field, and then the bigger the field, the quicker it would spawn things that you could collect, and especially weapons, because you use weapons to take out enemy portals. Goes on and on and on. And it was just huge, Neil. It was just, I was so addicted to it, to the point that I would be driving out at 10 o'clock at night, literally just saying to the wife, I'm just popping out to smash a portal. And it's 10 p.m. I have no reason to go and take a 20-minute drive in my car other than to smash an enemy portal in Ingress. Obsessing over my local nemesis, because you did get to kind of know other players, and it was actually became quite creepy how easy it was to figure out who was a player and who wasn't. and that actually causing, the state of play in my area and this nemesis that I had that would always smash up my work, because it took a lot of time investment actually to set up your fields well, and then having them smashed by somebody who may or may not have been a bus driver playing behind the wheel. That was actually then causing me sleepless nights. So I think Ingress is the only game that I've ever had to decide to go cold turkey on, Neil. What about yourself?
Yeah, the first game that springs to mind for me was when I first got a BlackBerry. It was a company-issued BlackBerry, and it came as standard with this poker game on there. I don't think you could play for real money on it. I certainly never did. But even so, it was really, really addictive because it was online. It linked up with other players. So that was probably one of the first experiences of a properly, massively multiplayer game on a mobile device that I ever had. And like you start, the more you play it, the more you recognize those other names, and you develop these nemesis or nemesi in your head who probably don't even know you exist. They probably don't give you a second thought, but you see that name coming up and you just have to beat them. But then moving on from games, you talked about the Facebook wall, and how you had to remove Facebook. I can completely relate to that. The idea that sometimes you're holding your phone and you're like, why did I pick this up? And you'll check the news and you'll check your email and you'll do a couple of other things. And then the cycle starts again. Oh, I'm checking the news again. I mean, I checked it 30 seconds ago, but I'm checking it again. And you just, it's a horrible loop that sometimes you just have to take the phone away, put it in a box and walk away from it to give yourself a break from it. Yeah. And doubly so as a YouTuber, I have to keep an eye on my social media, respond to people, comments on YouTube and things like that. So it's not something I can completely give up, and it has become an addiction of sorts. I will admit that. It's hard to find the balance. But gaming addictions in the retro sense, let's just go back to the old school, back to the vintage. Chris, what games back in the day have really hooked you? Can you think of any?
Hooked? Well, oddly, I didn't see it as that growing up, funnily enough. I don't think it's true of any arcade racer, although that said, many of my school books definitely had hand-drawn Ferrari Testarossas on many of the pages, and it was always the back view. Funny that. I loved my flight sims, yes, but that flowed into more healthy activities away from the computer, like reading up on aviation and going to air shows and making model aircraft and flying a plane at Biggin Hill where maybe I threw up, and also doing aerobatics over Jandakot here in Perth where maybe I threw up again. But anyway, games I would obsess over and be drawing maps of in class rather than doing my actual schoolwork would include games like Mercenary and Captive. And I think that's just the nature of those games. There's so many areas to explore, so many things you had to achieve. So I found those games really occupied my headspace when I wasn't sitting at the Amiga actually playing them.
Yeah, I get that. Games that continue to be played when you walk away, and you're just constantly thinking about, have I been to that area? Have I been to that part of the map? Waiting for the penny to drop to get you past the next bit. I quite like that.
That's it.
What I don't like in my own nature is that I'm a bit of a completionist. So over the years, I've got to learn this habit about myself to the point where I'm quite careful, and I try not to get sucked into new games that might trigger some of those behaviors. If the game has a main mission and side quests, I want to be doing all of those side quests. I want that progress bar to pop up and reward me and say 100% of this game has been completed. I'm really easily caught up in it. The whole reward system. I remember when I first got an Xbox and it started doing achievements and unlocking things. It was just pushing all my buttons. It's a terrible thing. And I think the absolute worst genre for me is car racing games for addictiveness, because if I really get into one, there's absolutely no end to the rabbit hole in it. The goal of car racing game is the fastest time around the track. So I can get absolute tunnel vision of just shaving millisecond after millisecond off each lap to try and get the fastest lap time. And it's not something I'm proud of. I just have to admit it unashamedly to friends, I think. And the worst example for that for me, there was a game called R Factor, which I got obsessed with around 2007. I don't know if that's one you've ever played, Chris. But it's a racing game or sim. It's more of a sim where every centimeter of the track seemed to count. It really did. It was ultra realistic. I think there's a sequel now. It's still going, which I refuse to touch for obvious reasons. Your tire temperature would change according to how you drive. Your car setup could be tweaked within an inch of its life. I got totally hooked on that. Before that, it was Project Gotham Racing 3 on the Xbox 360. I managed to be the second fastest in the world on one of the tracks on that game at one point. And then before that, it goes back to IndyCar racing, NASCAR, Jeff Cramman's F1 GP. I know full well now to avoid those games if I want to remain productive. I'll still dip in and enjoy them once in a while, but I just know the effect it will have on me if I get hooked on them. So, those are the ones I have to avoid. Yeah. Any similar stories from your side? Any obsessions or behaviors that you have to be aware of?
Well, I just want to say first, Neil, second fastest in the world, Neil. I'm seeing a clip from Father Ted where he's told he's only the second best priest, and it goes round and round in his head. So I think you've got to go back, Neil, and make sure you're more than the second best priest.
No. I know how badly that affected me. I tried for weeks to get the number one spot, and I just couldn't.
The closest I've been to that is actually on Battlezone on the PS4. There's you can see the scores every time in classic mode. So you go back to the wireframe version, and I've probably like 300th or something way down the leaderboard, but it's still I'm sure I can get further up. But anyway, it hasn't become an obsession yet. Obsessions. I mean, I'm a completionist as well, and on shooters, for example, like Doom and Quake and that kind of thing, I feel the game is best played on the hardest setting, unless that's one that respawns everything. And you haven't completed it until you've finished all the maps on the hardest setting. But if it's story driven, then I tend to go the other way now. I tend to, for things like, say, the BioShock trilogy, for example, which I really enjoyed, I'm happy with a lower setting, not too easy, but then I can enjoy the action and the story, and there's something to be said for that, I think. I definitely share your love of driving games, and as well, I ended up using them as a practice during my PS3 Gran Turismo days, because I had a 350Z in real life.
Nice.
So I basically set up a 350Z in the game to as close as I could get it to my real life car, and just practiced ready for track days. It was sort of this realization that I now had real cars and I could go on a real track rather than just doing it at the computer all the time, which was good. But I can't say I've been obsessed in recent times, though, other than Ingress, which we've already... No, wait a minute. There is another one. There is another confession, and it's another game I had to quit cold turkey. I can't believe I forgot about this. Fortnite. Did you play Fortnite, Neil?
Okay. So I was really hooked on a game called H1Z1 or H1Z1, which was like a zombie survival game. Played that for probably the best part of a year. We had a little group of friends who would get together. We'd use it as much as a social gathering as a game. We'd chat about our day while we built our base and all of that stuff, fighting off the zombies, fighting off other clans. Lots of funny stories and good memories from just silly things that happened, either because of planned raids or silly physics in the game that went wrong and just crazy things that happened. Loads of great memories of that. But when we got to the end of that sort of period and said, okay, it's time for a new game, and I've done this a few times in gaming, that's when I stepped back and said, no, I don't want a new obsession. And that new game that they all wanted to move to was Fortnite. And I took one look at it and thought, no, I can see exactly where this will go. I'm going to skip this one. So I didn't. What did I miss out on in Fortnite?
Oh, no, nothing. You were very wise. What you missed out on was... Well, look, it's just a very clever game. I mean, of course it is. They've made so much money from it, and it seems to have really put Epic on the map. Not that they weren't already, but... just the way the game is put together, the sounds that it makes when you shoot at the other players, the scores popping up from their heads that you can see, how many hit points you're taking off them, the rewards that you get in the game, the sound the chests make when you open them up to pick up some weapons, the fact that the map is ever changing and it goes through seasons. the feeling of achievement despite being hopeless at the game, which was me, although I did win only a couple of rounds, becoming the last player standing. But the fact that you had to follow the storm into the center of the map, you could survive for about an hour's worth of play without really achieving much, and that felt good. The whole game, the colors, the comic book style, the whole thing looks like a drug, Neil. I don't know what it is about it, but it's just addictive throughout. But it was when I got into trying to hit the daily, and they were daily achievements you had to hit to basically get your next season pass. That's when I realized that this was no longer something that I was doing to relax after work. This was work outside of work. So that was enough for me.
Yeah. But you won a few, are they battle royales that you have there? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember what they called it when you actually won. They were quite amusing wins, actually. They were almost accidental. One, I spent the entire round just sitting in a bush with a silenced pistol, and then realised it was just me and one other. Yeah, I was camping. I'm proud of it. And the storm happened to gather in around me, and suddenly it was me and one other guy, and I took him out. It was amusing. I probably still got the footage somewhere because I grabbed it off my PS4.
My 10-year-old nephew plays Fortnite. Do you still feel proud about possibly beating him?
No, I doubt I would have beaten. All the 10-year-olds beat me, Neil. And then they shout. I remember getting shouted at down the microphone because somebody entered my squad and then said, "Oh no, you're wearing a default skin. You must be rubbish." And off he ran.
Oh, yeah. I always find that odd now because, we are older gamers. We have to accept that, and we may be wanting to take part in these big online games where you are pitched against a 7-year-old. In many cases, absolutely destroyed by a 7-year-old, and it can be quite disheartening.
Usually destroyed.
Usually destroyed. Yeah. And there was just getting back onto the addictiveness thread. There was a period where addictive became a dirty word. I think our magazines used to rate addictiveness as a positive thing. 100% addictiveness in the ratings was a perfect score. But that became slightly negative over time, and a game could then be enthralling or captivating. But addictive seems to have too many negative connotations for them to really push it anymore. Not that would put off the loot box designers of the world in ways that you've explained, and you've explained it as a drug-like nature in Fortnite, and I think that's so true. Whether it's the visuals or the reward system, that it sometimes is more closely aligned to what you'd find in a bookmaker's, on their gambling systems than I personally think should be in games. And that's when the addictiveness becomes a very negative thing, I think. I don't know. Call me old-fashioned, though. I think at its heart of it, a game should be addictive, not because of the loot boxes and those mechanics, but just the gameplay. It should be an addictive thing, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Neil. I think you want something to draw you back to the game, otherwise what's the point? But I think going back to the story in question, when the game literally merges real life and real people with game objectives, then I think it can cross a line as well there. It's not the fault of the developer though, but it's definitely a consideration for the individual.
Yeah Speaking of addictive games, have you been playing Wordle?
No, I'm so confused. What's going on?
Pretty much everyone who's listening will know what Wordle is. There was some big news this morning, actually, that it's just a basic 5-letter word game where a really nice mechanic that's built into it is that you can only play it once a day. Once you've done it, a timer ticks down and you can't play it again until tomorrow. So that's actually good. A really positive thing, I think. It's an addictive game, keeps you wanting more, but you can only come back to it tomorrow. So you spend a couple of minutes each morning doing your Wordle over breakfast, and that's it. Whether it will stay that way, I don't know, because it was reported this morning that the New York Times, I think it was, has bought Wordle for a 7-figure sum from this guy who just stuck it on his website. No advertising, no registration needed. You just pop there and play the game. He's got 7 figures in his pocket now. And good on him, I say. Good on him for being rewarded for just making something free for anyone to play without plastering it with adverts and all the rest of it. So, who knows where Wordle will go next. Anyway, something that we can all agree on is that police officers should not be choosing Pokemon over a robbery in progress. Perhaps if smart devices were truly smart, they'd know when you were at work and what your priorities should be. I'm sure it won't be long.
I have a confession, Neil. I don't understand why people are trying to get old devices hooked up to the internet. How about you, Neil? Are any of your devices online? Your old retro computers, are they online?
Well, I mean, yes, technically, yes. Some of them are online, but not really because I have a desire to put them online, just because they're picking up a gateway address from the DHCP server to get them on the local network, because I like to sometimes FTP games onto systems, particularly where, for example, you've got a compact flash card or something like that inside the system and you don't want to have to unscrew it and take it apart to just bung one game on there. So I like to have some of my retro systems on the network. Therefore, they happen to have access to the gateway and be online as well, unless I manually remove that setting. There are very, very few times when I've gone onto the internet using them. You know, I popped onto a browser on a system and gone, yeah, it doesn't work. And I expected it not to work very well. But there you go. A 30-year-old system is online. Close that window. That's about it. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not a massive advocate for putting old systems online unless you've got a very specific reason.
That's a good use case, actually, getting stuff on it. I can see the day will come for my trusty A1200 over here for, getting extra WHD load games on when I want them. That'll be the easiest way to do it. But at the moment, I've resisted. Anyway, back to the story submitted by Clem Fandango. The latest is a Game Boy. Yep. Sebastian from YouTube channel and blog, which is called There Ought to Be, has painstakingly created a Wi-Fi cartridge for the original Game Boy. And yes, it connects to the internet. And he even shows reading Wikipedia on the device's monochrome screen. You may think I'm being offensive by calling this pointless, Neil. But imagine my surprise when right at the start of his video, Sebastian himself says, and I quote, "Okay, seriously, this is probably one of the most useless things I've ever created." I like this guy already. The first video on the topic really is the technical details of his useless creation, which is a cartridge, like I said, that uses the ESP32 and some witchcraft, I think, to connect to the worldwide whatever. And he details its shortcomings, like potentially shorting the entire device. But actually, Neil, I've been catching up with the following videos that he's made, and he started to use this thing to do some pretty cool stuff, including streaming movies to the Game Boy and even streaming GTA 5 to it, and actually playing the game on the Game Boy via his PS4. So the PS4 is doing the grunt work, but he's streaming both control and the visualization to the Game Boy. Still totally pointless activities, of course.
I was waiting for that. Yes. I mean, watching a movie on a Game Boy, it doesn't sound like a great experience.
No, I dare say he's got a smart TV he could stream those movies to, but still. But that is actually pretty amazing to see. What are your thoughts on this, Neil? Should we be forcing these poor things online or leaving them in their period correct off-grid bliss?
Well, just expanding on what I was saying earlier about transferring games onto these devices. Just this week, I was watching a review by Bob over on Retro RGB about a new NAS setup called Retro NAS, which is specifically designed, for example, you can use it for your misters. So you can point your misters to the share and play games directly from the NAS, as well as other retro devices. I think you can do it with a PlayStation 2, obviously a slightly hacked PlayStation 2 with a different dashboard and thing on there. So if you think about that, if you had a Retro NAS or a similar device on your local network and your Wi-Fi Game Boy cartridge could look at that location and list the games that are there, and you could just pick one and play it and easily update it, that would be quite nice. And then if you take that one step further, imagine if that NAS was somewhere on the internet, maybe you had it at home. Well, then you could quickly and easily load your games. There could be a situation where you've got your 1989 Game Boy on a bus, tethered to your iPhone to get it online, talking to your NAS back at home to load, a ROM. that's a situation that might happen. I don't see us getting to the point where there'll be a commercial aspect to it, whereby somebody is hosting and you're paying for the Netflix of ROM storage to load onto your Game Boy. But it's not unrealistic to see how it could get there, and that could happen. So yeah, not completely useless. If you take it to the nth degree, you can see some uses for it. And I should also point out that you're the man who was touting the delights of teletext to us just last week. So you can't really come here and tell us you don't see the purpose of this. But come on, everyone, you should be using teletext, surely.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point.
One thing there are some other things actually. Just thinking about it, the Game Boy obviously had the link-up cable, didn't it?
Yes.
So
it did.
can you substitute it for that? Could you wirelessly link up to another Game Boy?
No. No multiplayer gaming on this device, no. But on Sebastian's blog, he does reference the work of Andy West from YouTube channel Element 14 Presents. And Andy has created a Wi-Fi adapter for the link port on the side of the Game Boy. But Sebastian's project is actually a Wi-Fi cartridge, so it literally goes in the cartridge slot, so It's not talking to that port at all. I guess maybe a homebrew game could be developed to utilize that onboard Wi-Fi, but then you'd need a through port, I assume, to plug in the cartridge or an SD card reader or something. You've got to load the ROM somehow, and at the moment the cartridge slot is taken up with the Wi-Fi. So he's just using this thing to connect to the internet or stream from devices on his local network. So yeah, I'm kind of on the fence on it, to be honest. I like the fact that none of my classic computers are connected to the interwebs. Even my Amigas have so far been spared that madness, but I have to say that seeing GTA 5, pointless though it is, streaming to a monochrome Game Boy is pretty awesome.
Pointless, but awesome.
Awesome.
Chris, will it run Doom used to be the age-old question that dogged Amiga fans. So many of us jumped ship when we saw what was coming out of the gates of hell on our PCs. And for many years, Amiga diehard fans wanted to prove that it was possible to run Doom. And not only was it proven possible with enough power thrown at it, some incredibly impressive Doom-like games emerged for stock 1200s and indeed A500s, games like Dread, which we covered on the show sometimes back. Well, when you've done Doom, there's a natural next step, or at least there is for me, and that next step is Duke Nukem 3D. And there has been some drum banging this week about something called JF Duke 3D for the Amiga. It's not the first time we've seen it attempted, as we'll discuss, but Chris, are you a big Duke fan?
Absolutely loved Duke 3D, Neil. I have to be honest, can I admit this? I don't think I ever bought the full version. It was one that I acquired. But anyway, and it was the Atomic Edition. But I spent so many hours on it. And back in that period, I did have a legit version of Quake. And whilst Quake was awesome because, of the full 3D poly texture mapped environments and enemies, so it was leaps and bounds ahead in that respect. Duke just had the humor, it had the storyline, it had the action, it had the fun. It was just so good, and I played that thing from beginning to end on the hardest setting, Neil, but not the one that respawns everything. And I even spent many hours making my own maps for it, mainly places that I worked. But yeah, absolutely loved it. But talking about Duke, I assume this is where you're going, Duke on the Amiga. Hasn't that been done already? Isn't AmiDuke a thing? How is this different?
Yeah, it is. Just going back to the injection of humor that you found made the game so good. I completely agree. The build engine, it wasn't outdated because it did expand on that original Doom 2.5D style engine. But Quake was proving that, this full polygon and texture mapping was the way forward. But it carried on for years. We had games like Redneck Rampage, which just shone with its humor. I can't remember when Rise of the Triad came out, but that was also a good one that was based on on the same engine. So it carried on going for some years, and it just went to prove that it wasn't all about the polygons. It was about a good storyline and some humor as well. So I completely agree with you on that. On AmiDuke, Nova Coder released AmiDuke some years back, and that also, like this one, it supported Vampires, the Vampire add-on for your Amiga. It supported the SAGA mode, which was a specific mode to the Vampire to extend on the AGA. So you could really push your Vampire to the limit with that and see what it was capable of. And a quick search will turn up other examples. So, for example, a search on YouTube, you'll see Duke 3D running on Amiga OS 4, on Amiga 1 hardware, I think it was, back in 2012. You can run Duke 3D through a Mac emulator on your Amiga, something I've done myself. If you've got enough power, obviously it's not a native port, but you can do it and you can enjoy the game. And now there's this new one, which is based on something called JF Duke, which was a reworking of the game designed to make it easy to play Duke on modern Windows, Mac, and Linux machines. So now we've got an Amiga fork, an Amiga version of that project. So yeah, you're right, Chris. It's not a world first. We have seen other versions of it before. Like those other versions, you're going to need some serious grunt, though. So are you ready for the specs, Chris?
Go on then.
Your Amiga is going to need a 68060 CPU and a floating point unit to go with it. You're going to need AGA or a real-time graphics card. You're going to need 16 meg of fast RAM. And, I think it's about 45 meg of hard disk space that you need, plus more if you want the music on there. It must rip some of the CD music. There was CD music. I think there certainly was on the Atomic Edition, wasn't there?
Yeah,
I can't remember now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just your average Amiga in 1996 when Duke came out, right?
Well, Neil, I've only just got myself an A1200 with an 030 in it. I've got 128 meg of RAM, so I'm okay there. But you're telling me I need to upgrade already like it's 1996? It would be cheaper to, jump to a period correct PC, dare I say. I'm not sure how I feel about, because you can. The same goes, to be honest, in the ports for Doom and Quake. To me, they're PC games. So other than to prove a point, I'm really not sure of the obsession with porting these things to the Amiga.
Yeah, you're totally right there. I think you hit the nail on the head. For the money it would have cost, you could have got a good PC to play Duke on, and probably games that needed a higher spec again. So I agree with you there. I think that sometimes these projects are not a question of do I want it. It's not like this thing is ever going to end up on the shelves as a commercial project. It's always catering to a niche audience. Sometimes it's just nice to applaud a developer who wanted to take on the challenge and succeeded. So I always like to see that. In terms of performance, on a Vampire, this thing is silky smooth. It's sitting at around 60 to 70 frames per second. It's not one of those ports that you see on the Amiga that's just kind of struggling to pull itself along and say, look, I can do it too, even though I'm in a tiny window to get a playable frame rate. It's absolutely smooth. It's smoother than I ever saw it on my PC back in the day, that's for sure. You can also see it running on a PyStorm in an A500, which, again, runs very well indeed. It's quite mad seeing Duke run on what looks like a stock A500 wedge with a Pi hidden away inside it. That's quite a nice thing to see. Also an interesting contrast between the PyStorm and the Vampire, because they're both perfectly capable of running it, and there's a vast difference in the price between the two. So that's quite an interesting thing to see. What I've not seen a video of yet is this thing running on an actual vintage 060 Amiga. I'd really like to see that, how it performs. Yeah. So I'm not seeing it on any actual real vintage hardware. So Chris, Doom, we've seen that on the Amiga. Duke, what's the next game, would you say, from the PC Hall of Fame that you'd like to see on an Amiga?
Actually, I think I've got a sensible answer to that question. Other than one thing I do need to see on the Amiga is a good port of Outrun. But what I'd really like to see on the Amiga, on a stock A1200, is X-Wing.
Oh, okay. Nice. Yeah. So, I mean, we had Wing Commander. Did that not satisfy your needs enough? Does it need to be the Star Wars universe for you?
It does need, just because it had Mark Hamill in it, Neil. It's still not Star Wars. And you know what? Wing Commander completely escaped me, and I jumped over. I was already on Frontier and also First Encounters, which I think I was one of the very few fans of. But yeah, X-Wing. I mean, I think the Amiga is more than capable, but it was never ported across, or X-Wing versus TIE Fighter or any of those. It would be interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And actually, Wing Commander, now I mention it, that was one of those games that was considered a PC game through and through. And we were never going to see that on the Amiga. It took a while for us to get a port, but we did eventually get it. But it does still shine on the PC compared to the Amiga, I think. So, but there's only so far we can go if we're depending on the grunt of the CPU. So I'd probably like to see developers take on some of those games that are right at the threshold where we had both software and hardware rendering versions of games. So the most obvious for me, having recently seen it on the GBA in last week's show when we talked about it, is Tomb Raider. Can Open Lara be ported natively, or is it too much even for a Vampire or a Pi-Storm? The original game, I think, wanted a Pentium 60 to run. Probably wanted a bit more than that for it to run super smoothly, but Pentium 60 is what it says on the box. So perhaps it's possible. I'm not sure. Maybe someone in the comments will shout at me because such a project exists. But I honestly haven't come across any attempts at Tomb Raider on the Amiga just yet. So let us know if you have. But it also raises a question which you touched on, as in the point of all this. If a port needs the power of a Vampire or a Pi-Storm to run it, and if even the fastest vintage accelerators struggle to run it, have we crossed some kind of threshold here? Are we still Amiga gaming, or is this something else? I'm not saying that I dislike seeing the boundaries pushed ever harder, but if these devices are accepted as the new normal Amigas, is there a risk that those Amiga users who like to stick to the original hardware might find themselves unable to run future releases? I hope not, because it's those games like Dread on a stock Amiga 500 that really teach us more about what might have been possible at the time. It's not just an imagined future where ever more powerful accelerators arrived for our systems. So I hope developers keep that in mind and continue to cater for us old school Amiga gamers who like to keep things stock. As always, though, it's an interesting time to be an Amigan.
Okay, Neil, it's on to our community question of the week, which is all about joysticks, basically. Which was your favourite and why? Which could you never get on with? And were there any that you loved but found to have below par build quality? Neil, do you want to kick off with the first answer?
Well, we've had a lot of answers, so thank you everyone who took part. We'll read the top 3 most upvoted answers on our subreddit, which is reddit.com/r/this week in retro if you want to participate in this or future questions of the week. So Pajako6502 tops our list. He says, I used my trusty Conic Speed King for years. That's the one I've got here on the desk. I only recently found out that this was released in the US as the Epix 500XJ. Didn't know that myself. I had plenty of other joysticks, but the Conix was king. A close second would have been something only I seemed to have owned. I purchased a build-it-yourself joystick kit from either Maplin or Tandy. It had a light blue base and a red pistol grip with a single red fire button. It was identical to a Sure Shot standard single-button joystick. I sadly no longer have it, and information is non-existent online. Did he imagine it? Can anyone else remember that? A Maplin or Tandy build-it-yourself joystick kit. Do you remember seeing build-it-yourself joysticks?
No, I remember disassembling my own joysticks, but never one that was intentionally come as a kit form, no.
Yeah, but anyway, the Conic Speed King, I think, will be a popular choice among many people. What's our next one, Chris?
Right, so Dave Velociraptor. Mine was the Zip Stick. It's the first joystick I got that didn't have the little metal blister switches that always broke. It's always the first one that didn't try to look like something from a fighter cockpit. The Cheetah 125 and the Amstrad JY-2s can get in the bin. Oh. Mine never wore out. So going back to the Zip Stick, mine never wore out. I kept it from my CPC through to my ST until I got a PC when it was then obsolete. I prefer my Mayflash F500. Mine has genuine Samoa parts for my multi-system because it's huge and sits flat. My Monster joystick is great for my CPC. And my Arcade R is a modern take on the Competition Pro/Zipstick, and I feel better quality. I definitely echo his thoughts On the Zip Stick, I have a soft spot for the Cheetah 125 because that's what I got with my Spectrum. But the Zip Stick, I'm the same. I went through so many quick shots and quick joys and broke all those micro switch springs. The Zip Stick was the only joystick I ended up with that I literally couldn't break. What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, solid stick. And I've still got ones in the cave, which I've never had to perform any maintenance on other than cleaning them. And they work perfectly fine. As well as the Competition Pro. I think that's on a par with the Zip Stick there. And Dave mentioned some modern sticks there, Monster Joystick. Everyone knows I love them. But also the Arcade R, which I agree, it's very much in the style of the Competition Pro. And the Zip Stick, it's injection molded, so it's got a nice finish to it. And definitely a joystick worth looking at if you're considering getting an old stick, but you're a bit worried about it might be a bit flaky, it might be a bit old. Well, here's a new one that does really live up to the reputation of those old sticks. So definitely worth checking out. Mayflash F500. I haven't tried that one myself. I'll have to look that one up. But Dave doesn't share our love of the fighter stick style with the. Is that what he said? He didn't like the ones that look like fighter sticks. Yeah.
He did. He's probably not up to playing flight sims. That's all I can say, Neil.
Probably too complicated. Yeah.
I'll be Maverick, you be Goose, Neil.
Yeah, because I was inverted. So Richard Shears says, my favorite joystick just proves how much image can win over sensibilities. You see, I'd love to say on reflection that it was the Zip Stick, but no. Whilst it is now my favorite vintage joystick, back in the day, I loved the QuickShot 2 Turbo. I think that's another one we've got on the desk here, not the Turbo. I think the Turbo was red, wasn't it? Was the Turbo the red one?
Yes, the red base. That looked like a Turbo.
Oh, he goes on to say, actually, he says, why? Because it looked so cool. That red base, the blister-inducing fighter jet-influenced grip. It just set my imagination flowing. I was the pilot flying that cutting-edge jet at supersonic speeds. It never occurred to me that perhaps cutting-edge jet technology might have actually produced something a tad more comfortable in reality. Our naivety and suspension of disbelief that only a child possesses. Very nice. True. I had a QuickShot 2 Turbo. I mean, I'll be honest, I had pretty much every joystick going under the sun that cost less than £10 or less than £12, and I broke it. If I'd had some more money and spent it wisely, I would have probably gone for the joystick that a lot of people have mentioned in the comments, which is the TAC 2. There's a lot of love for the TAC 2. Have you ever used that one?
I haven't, but I have seen it at the Perth user group meets, and it just looks like a solid thing. Just the build quality is just, better than anything I certainly ever had growing up.
Yeah, good memories. I'm surprised we didn't see much talk of joypads in there because they just didn't work out for me on computers. It had to be a joystick and not a joypad. Until we started to get sticks on joypad, perhaps. I'm still not totally on board with joypads on PCs and Amigas. It's a conversation for another day. And so our community question of the week for this week is, it's all about game addiction. Is there a game from back in the day that you were completely obsessed with? Did you, like Chris, have to go cold turkey? Tell us your stories. Let us know how it affected your life, your friends, your family. Did you lock yourself away like a hermit, never to be seen for weeks on end? What did you have to do to break the cycle? Let us know all about it by going over to reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. And also you can go there to submit your news stories to appear on the show. The most popular news stories will be considered for the show. And the more news you submit, the more we've got to talk about. So please head over to the subreddit. As always, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Bye.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil Thomas from RNC The Cave and Chris Winter from 005 Agema. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.